She didn't belong to him. The numbers made that clear. She was a line item, senior financial analyst, fully burdened cost, non-exempt, and Asher Rand had never confused what he owned with what he wanted. That was the lie he told himself every morning when Briar Oates walked into his office with 2 black coffees and a stack of quarterly projections that would have made a federal auditor weep with frustration. Not because they were fraudulent, because they were perfect. Every number nested inside a number, inside a shell company, inside a trust, layers of legitimate obscuring the illegitimate, the way sediment obscures a fault line. She was the fault line's architect. She was 27 years old, wore her dark hair in a braid that was always slightly unraveling by noon, and she had the flat, patient eyes of someone who had learned very early that the world didn't reward sentiment. She had grown up poor in a county where poor meant structural, generational, the kind that didn't leave fingerprints but left marks in other ways. She'd gotten 2 years into a forensic accounting degree before the money ran out. She'd been waitressing at a hotel bar when Rand's former CFO slid a business card across the counter and said, very quietly, that her ability to spot the skimming in the hotel's daily deposit reports, which she had absolutely not been asked to do, was worth considerably more than her hourly wage. She had called the number. She had passed 3 increasingly strange interviews. And then she had walked into the 42nd floor of the Rand Group building and started untangling 3 years of financial disasters that his previous analyst had created by being both incompetent and too afraid to say so. That had been 3 years ago. In that time she had reconstructed offshore transfer routes, drafted legal frameworks for 6 shell entities, and once, at 2 a.m. in a warehouse in Gary, Indiana, corrected an invoice discrepancy in real time while 2 men with guns stood 6 feet behind her and Rand stood 6 feet in front of her, watching her work with an expression she had never been able to fully decode. He didn't look at her like she was a tool. He didn't look at her like she was a threat. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at a complex lock, with complete attention and a private certainty that he would eventually figure out how it opened. She had filed that observation and never looked at it directly again. It was a Thursday in October when she told him she was leaving at 5. She didn't ask. That was important. She wasn't the kind of person who asked Asher Rand for things because asking created an obligation in him, and obligation in a man like Rand had a way of calcifying into control. She stated it. She finished the amended LLC filings for the lakefront acquisition, set them squarely in the center of his leather desk blotter, and said, "I'm leaving at 5 today. The Lakeview projections are in the drive. I've flagged everything that needs your sign-off before Monday." Rand was standing at the window. He did that when he was thinking, stood with his back to the room and watched the Chicago skyline like it owed him something. The afternoon light caught the scar along his jaw, the one he'd had since before she worked for him, the one nobody in the office ever mentioned. He turned slightly, not enough to face her. 5, he said. Yes. A pause, the kind of pause that in a different kind of office from a different kind of man would have been followed by a reasonable question. Instead, Rand said nothing for 4 full seconds. Briar counted them. She had learned, working for him, that his silences had textures. This one was fine-grained and controlled. The silence of a man who wanted to say something and had decided, at the last possible moment, not to. "The Velasquez account," he said. "Reviewed and reconciled, bottom drawer, red tab." Another pause. "Fine." She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. Oates. She stopped. She did not turn around. "Be on your phone," he said. She almost smiled. She did not. "Good night, Rand." His name was Derek Cho. He worked in urban planning for the city, a fact Briar had considered carefully given that Rand Group held 17 active construction contracts across various city departments. She had run the organizational charts in her head the way she ran everything, systematically, looking for conflicts. Derek was 3 departments and 2 organizational layers removed from any Rand-adjacent decision-making. She had concluded he was safe. He had met her at a coffee counter 3 weeks ago. He had seen her reading a depreciation schedule on her lunch break and, instead of being intimidated, asked her what it was for. She had told him, briefly and technically, expecting him to lose interest. He hadn't. He said his grandmother had kept books for a restaurant in Pilsen for 40 years, and that numbers were a kind of language too, and Briar had looked at him. Really looked and thought, "This is a person who will never need me to translate anything into something less frightening." The restaurant he'd chosen was a small Italian place in River North. She wore a dark green dress she'd bought on sale 18 months ago and never had occasion to wear. She let her hair down. She took the L instead of a cab because she needed the 20 minutes of anonymous movement, the city rushing past the windows, to remember that she had a life existing outside the 42nd floor. Dinner was easy in the way only uncomplicated things are. Derek asked questions that were actually curious. He laughed at things that were genuinely funny. When the food came, he talked about his grandmother's restaurant, and Briar found herself telling him, carefully, in broad strokes, about her county, her mother, the 2 years of school that had been both the best and worst investment she'd ever made. She was not unhappy. That was the precise and honest accounting of it, not unhappy. But twice during dinner she caught herself scanning the windows, an old habit. In 3 years of working for Rand, she had learned to track exits, read rooms, identify which body in a crowded space was carrying. It was automatic now, grooved into her nervous system like a reflex she hadn't asked for. The second time she scanned the glass, something caught her eye. Across the street, in the shadow of an awning, a dark shape that didn't move the way pedestrians moved. Still, patient, watching. She blinked. A cab passed, the shadow was gone. Derek said something, and she laughed. She filed the shadow under paranoia, the occupational hazard of working in an industry where paranoia was frequently justified, and turned her attention back to the man across the table who was doing nothing more dangerous than offering her a taste of his osso buco. When his hand covered hers briefly, a light, warm, entirely uncomplicated gesture, she noticed 2 things in quick succession. First, it was nice. Second, her immediate involuntary comparison was to a hand that was larger, rougher, and that had never once touched hers. She filed that one deep and did not look at it. 3 weeks later, Briar was processing vendor invoices on a Friday afternoon when she found the discrepancy. It was small. Most people would have missed it. That was the point, she understood afterward. It had been buried the way she would have buried it, which meant whoever had done it either knew her methods or was her. A consulting fee, $42,000, routed through Lakeshore Development Partners, one of Rand's come-cleaner shell entities, to a parent company she recognized as the umbrella corporation for the city's planning commission vendor pool. The memo line read, "Strategic Relocation Advisory." The date was the morning after her dinner with Derek. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she opened a second window and ran a search she had absolutely no professional reason to run. Derek Cho, city employee, organizational placement. She cross-referenced the parent company. She cross-referenced the relocation advisory memo. 2 days after her dinner, Derek's firm had received a call, a position in Seattle, his title doubled, relocation covered in full, the kind of opportunity his current track would have made him wait 5 years for. He had texted her 3 days ago that he was sorry, that things had gotten complicated, that he hoped she understood. She had texted back that she understood. She had meant it, in the way she always meant things, practically without drama. People left, opportunities arose. It was fine. But she hadn't known then who had arranged the leaving. Briar printed the invoice. She did not highlight it. She folded it once, put it in her jacket pocket, and sat at her desk for 6 more minutes, breathing steadily, before she stood up and walked to the closed door at the end of the floor and opened it without knocking. Rand was on the phone. He held up one finger. She stood in front of his desk and waited. She was good at waiting. 3 years working in rooms where impatience was treated as a liability had trained it entirely out of her. When he hung up, he turned to look at her. Whatever he read in her expression shifted something in his own. A small, barely perceptible recalibration. The look of a man who has run a calculation and does not fully like the result. Briar placed the invoice on his desk. She smoothed it flat with 2 fingers. Strategic Relocation Advisory, she said, $42,000. Lakeshore Development Partners, October 15th. Rand looked at the paper. He did not look at her. I see a billing entry, she continued. I see a shell entity. I see a date. She paused. I also see a man who accepted a position in Seattle approximately 72 hours after I had dinner with him. The room held very still. I'd like to know if those 2 things are connected, she said. Rand picked up his glass. He set it back down without drinking. Yes, he said. The word was flat and undecorated, and she had not expected it. She had expected a deflection, a corporate excuse, something she would have to work to dismantle. Not yes, stated like a number, like a fact, like something that simply was. You arranged it, she said. I arranged an opportunity. He was qualified. Rand finally looked at her. His eyes were the grey of poured concrete and just as unrevealing. He took it. You arranged it the morning after you. She stopped. Her voice was perfectly level, but somewhere behind her sternum a pressure had been building since she'd opened the invoice. Not grief. Something harder and sharper. Were you there that night? He said nothing. I thought I saw something outside the restaurant, Briar said. I told myself I was being paranoid. She looked at him steadily. I'm not usually paranoid. No, Rand said, you're not. The pressure behind her sternum became something with an edge. He was a decent person, she said. He worked for the city planning department, and he asked me questions about depreciation schedules, and he has a grandmother in Pilsen. Her voice did not rise. This was deliberate. You removed him from my life because he took me to dinner. He was a complication. For who? Rand set his jaw. For who? She repeated. For me. The words came out rough, pulled from somewhere she had never heard him pull words from before. The composed, controlled architecture of his voice had a fracture in it, and she could see the effort it cost him not to seal it immediately. He was a complication for me. The room held the statement. Briar picked up the invoice. She folded it back into quarters and put it in her jacket pocket. I see, she said. She walked to the corner chair where she'd left her bag that morning. She picked it up. I'm resigning, she said. Effective close of business today. I'll finish the week's filing before I leave. You'll have full continuity documentation by 6 o'clock. Oates. I'm not negotiating. I didn't. He stopped. His hands were at his sides, and she had never seen his hands without a purpose before, without a glass, a folder, a phone to organize his stillness around. They hung there, slightly open, and the sight of it was more unsettling than any of the other things she'd seen in 3 years. I wasn't going to negotiate. Then we understand each other. He's fine. The words came fast, which meant they cost him something. I didn't damage his career. The position is genuine. Senior planner, a city development project he'd have waited years for on his current track. He's in Seattle. He's doing well. A pause. I know that doesn't make it right. She had heard Asher Rand say a great many things in 3 years. She had never heard him say anything even approximating that. It made her angrier, somehow, not less angry, because it would have been significantly easier to leave cleanly if he'd simply kept being exactly what she needed him to be. No, she said, it doesn't. She slung her bag over her shoulder. Good night, Rand. She completed the filing. She was out by 6:15. She did not cry in the elevator. She had never cried in that elevator, not once in 3 years, and she was not going to start now. The new job was safe in the way that safe things are, fluorescent, horizontal, structured around quarterly performance reviews and collaborative synergy sessions. The people were fine. The work was manageable. She sat in a corner office with actual windows, which she had been told to appreciate, and processed financial compliance documentation for a logistics firm, with no organized crime affiliations whatsoever. which should have felt like a relief, and mostly felt like working with the volume turned all the way down. She was fine. She told herself this every morning and didn't examine the seams. 4 weeks after her resignation, she got a call from Thomas Webb, a tax attorney she had worked with on 3 of Rand's corporate restructurings, a careful, grey-haired man with a talent for understatement. He said, in the mild tone he reserved for moderate disasters, that the Cook County DA's office had opened an inquiry into Rand Group's construction contract compliance. The inquiry stemmed from a discrepancy in the fiscal year 2022 filing. A discrepancy, he noted carefully, that he was fairly certain had not existed in the filing Briar had submitted. His new person, Thomas said, made a small error, the kind that creates a thread. And someone is pulling it, Briar said. At a moderate but accelerating pace, he said. She thanked him and hung up. She sat with her hands flat on her desk and thought about the thread. She knew which thread. She had buried it herself in March of 2022 after an acquisition went sideways and 3 subcontracted payments needed rerouting through a holding entity that no longer existed. She had buried it the way you buried things when clean solutions weren't available, carefully, completely, in a way that was invisible if you knew what to look for and catastrophic if you pulled it without knowing what you'd find at the other end. The new person would not know. 15 people on Rand Group's legitimate payroll, accountants, project managers, administrative staff who had no idea what they'd walked into, would not know either, when the investigation widened, why they were suddenly persons of interest in a federal inquiry. Briar opened her laptop. She closed it. She opened it again. I hate this, she said to no one. She did not call ahead. She showed up at 6 in the evening, walked through the lobby, and took the elevator to 42. The floor was dark except for the light in Rand's office at the far end. She pushed the door open. He was sitting at his desk with a glass of whiskey and the printout of the 2022 Q3 amended filing. Her filing. He had it marked in 3 places with a red pen, which told her he'd identified the approximate location of the problem, but not the mechanism. He looked older than 4 weeks ago, or maybe she was simply seeing his face without the armor of routine around it. He looked up. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The Q3 amended, she said. You know where the problem is. I know where to look, he said carefully. I haven't found the load-bearing piece. Your new person didn't bury it correctly. She walked to her old desk. Someone else's folders and mug were on it now, moved them to the side, sat down and opened her laptop. Give me the current access credentials. Oates, his voice was very quiet. Why are you here? She typed in a temporary guest login she still remembered. Because you hired someone who didn't know where the bodies were buried, and now the DA's office is 3 days from finding a shovel. She looked up briefly. 15 people on your payroll don't know what they walked into. I'm not going to let them get caught in something they can't see, because your new analyst missed a cross-reference. That's not, he stopped. The whole reason, she fished. No, it's not. The admission sat between them, simple and undecorated, the way the numbers were when you stripped everything else away. She went back to the screen. She started working. For an hour neither of them spoke. The city outside ran its usual nighttime calculus of light and movement. She could hear, periodically, the sound of ice shifting in his glass, which meant he was not drinking, only holding something. I had you'll drive me there that night, Rand said. It came out of nowhere, into the silence, with the slightly compressed quality of something that had been building pressure for some time. I told myself it was routine, that I was in the area. Pause. I was not in the area. Briar kept typing. I stood across the street, he said. I watched you through the window. Another pause, longer. You were smiling. Not that you don't smile at me like that. Not the way you smiled at him. He said it without inflection, which was how she had learned he delivered the things that cost him most. I didn't go inside. I went back to the car. And the next morning you arranged a career opportunity, she said. Yes. Rand. She stopped typing. She turned in the chair to look at him directly across the length of the room. "You could have just said something to me." He was quiet. 3 years, she said. 3 years of whatever this has been. And you stood across the street in the dark and watched through a window, and then spent $42,000 to rearrange someone's entire life rather than walk through a door and say one honest thing. The muscle in his jaw moved. "Why?" she asked. He set the glass down. He looked at her the way he looked at complicated problems, with complete attention and a private, costly honesty that he rationed like a finite resource. "Because if I had walked through that door," he said slowly, "and you had looked at me the way you look at me in this office, professionally, correctly, like I am your employer and nothing more, I would have had confirmation, and could have managed confirmation." His hands were flat on the desk. "What I could not manage was this, which was the alternative." "This," Briar said. "You being here," he said, "when you don't have to be." She held his gaze. Outside sirens spiraled up somewhere below and then faded. She turned back to her screen. Her hands were steady on the keys. "Derek is doing well in Seattle," she said. "I looked him up." "He's a good fit for the project," Rand said. "I know. I ran the org charts." She paused. "I'm still angry about how it happened." Yes. He said it without argument, which cost her something she hadn't expected to lose. "I'm going to fix this filing," she said, "and then we're going to talk about what this actually is, what it costs, what it gets us, and I want that conversation in clear terms, not in silences, not in shell companies, not in relocation advisories." She glanced over her shoulder. "I'm very good with numbers. I need you to give me something real to work with." Rand was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. It was not a declaration. It was not a grand gesture. It was the sound of a man who was accustomed to winning by controlling every variable, agreeing, finally, to introduce one he couldn't entirely quantify. She found the thread at 9:47 p.m. She buried it correctly in 11 minutes. She documented the fix and saved the backup in 3 separate locations, the way she always did, because good work deserved to survive its context. When she finally leaned back in the chair, Rand brought her a coffee. Black. He set it 2 inches from her left hand, which was exactly where she would have wanted it, and she did not remark on this, because some things didn't need remarking. "I should tell you," she said, "that I don't know yet what this is, what I want it to be." "Neither do I," he said. He sat on the edge of the desk across from her, closer than he'd ever positioned himself voluntarily. The scar along his jaw was sharp in the lamplight. "I've spent 3 years being certain of things I am apparently not certain of." "Welcome to how the rest of us live," she said. He almost smiled. It was small and fractured, and she catalogued it carefully, because it was the first time she was certain it was real. She wasn't sure, sitting in the dark of the floor she had walked away from 4 weeks ago, whether what she was rebuilding was a working arrangement, a reckless mistake, or something that didn't have a clean category yet. She was used to things with clean categories. She had built her entire professional life on the discipline of sorting. But she had also spent 3 years in rooms where 2 things were true simultaneously: the surface and what lay beneath it, and she had learned to hold that without flinching. The city ran its numbers below the windows. She picked up the coffee. Some accounts, she decided, you didn't close. You kept the books honest, you watched what accumulated, and you made absolutely certain this time that both parties understood the terms before anyone signed anything. She would get the terms, and she would make sure, this time, that there was no buried thread that either of them hadn't seen coming.